Hi everybody, welcome to Art Discourse. This is a show where Chrissy and I draw a question randomly from our question machine, and then we read that question and answer that question to the best of our abilities. This week's question is, do you think being out in the country is better than being in the big city for you as an artist or you as a business?
Is big city in quotations?
Yes, it is.
I like it.
Hello, it's me again. I'm calling from a faraway land. Pick up the phone. I'm calling from a different time zone. Heard you are a pretty good source for major topics in art discourse. Hello, I'll leave my questions as a message at the dial tone.
From our experience, okay. We have chosen to live out in rural Ontario. That was like a conscious choice when we started our business planning back maybe like several months before we even started Sparkbox.
Yeah.
Being in the country and being in the city, they are kind of like, it's a bit of a wash. I think it really depends on your personality and your individual circumstances to which one you might find better. If your practice relies on part-time work where you have to supplement your income, like being in a city is by far more, it's just better. There's a lot more jobs, there's a lot more flexibility in that regard, whereas being in the countryside, like you have to kind of like work or get lucky to know somebody who wants to hire you for only like a certain period of time. That's not just the tourist season. So like I think that if one is better than the other is really a question of like what it is, which one is the better fit for you, like personality wise.
Yeah.
Because like now, after like we've owned our house for about 10 years, like with whatever crazy real estate stuff's happening now, like housing here is like just as expensive as in Toronto. And so for like whatever reason, like that was like buying our house was a big reason to be in the countryside. And now like it doesn't matter because I still couldn't afford a house here now.
You know, when we first started, we really considered what our priorities were, what our capacity was, and what we knew we would be fine fighting to get, even if we weren't in a space, like in a larger city space. So we knew that we were completely comfortable driving to cities to participate in events and making those connections. We were willing to do that. We knew that our space with the residency, we wanted it to be somewhere that was quiet, that was peaceful, that had like, you know, open space for people to have, you know, like literal space to go be by themselves outside and think about their project. We didn't want it to be loud and noisy.
Like the 20th floor of an apartment building.
Yeah, so, you know, we wanted it to be like a quaint sort of countryside experience. And that means that the people that have come to stay with us, they also were interested in what that was like. And for some people, it doesn't work. Like, they don't like how quiet it is. They want to be able to go out every single night. They want to be able to eat any kind of food, you know, imaginable under the sun at any hour of the day. You have to be willing to make those kinds of, like, sacrifices seems a bit extreme, but you have to like be open to not having some things when you decide to live in a certain place. You really want to have a giant, huge yard and you make less than $20,000 a year, you probably aren't going to get that living in a city. And if you really need to constantly be like out in the hustle and bustle of something, then you're probably not going to get that in the country. So.
Yeah, bars aren't really open till 2 a.m. here. What bar? When we were trying to figure out where we were going to position ourselves, there was options like Kingston, Toronto, Barrie, and Picton was our other option. And we chose the rural for like a kind of a multitude of reasons. They stem between like the financial, I guess, lower overhead possibility of living
I
in rural.
also had a job.
Chrissy had a job. We also have family here, so that means that like we have a bit of a connection and network already.
What's interesting about how it played out for us, and you know, we really can only speak from our own experience on this. I think at the beginning, like graduating from an undergrad degree, and for me, this is where I grew up, this is my hometown. So moving back to my hometown, my small town hometown, definitely was an uncomfortable choice because I, throughout my entire adolescence, was just, I could not wait to not live here. And so it, you know, it felt like a betrayal to my teen self to decide to move back to Prince Edward County. But ultimately, I had a job working at a commercial gallery in this area. It was a really good job. I didn't want to leave it. So that was a huge pull. It meant that we had something that was already existing that was like a regular income that we could start with. And then also we met with the local business, entrepreneurship community here, and they were very receptive to our like kooky little idea that we were presenting to them. And I could be wrong, but I feel like we probably wouldn't have had the confidence to go into like a larger city center entrepreneurship space and present ourselves and our sketchbook and our idea the way that we did here.
Yeah, we ended up with a lot of like FaceTime with the Economic Development Office, like the officers, and like we ended up like talking a lot with like the BIA, Palace CFDC, and I think that if we'd lived in Toronto, we would have like still talked to some of these types of organizations. My gut says that we would have had less access to them. Mm-hmm. There would have been more accessible. I feel if we were in Toronto versus here, Sparkbox would have had to change in order to meet some like simple demands like overhead and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think that there have been benefits and cons to Sparkbox being in the countryside versus in the city. I feel like if we had been in the city, we may have had to take on more commercial printing jobs to make kind of ends meet, or we may have had to made a bigger and weirder push with the residency to grow it by several slots in order to cover the overhead. I don't even know how that would have worked, because like, God, we would never have been able to buy property in Toronto.
No, that would have been,
like, that would have been really
literally impossible.
Yeah, so like we would have had to been renting, and then like that becomes a whole messy other kind of scenario, which like could have worked out.
Yeah, I feel like the shape that Sparkbox would have taken would have been drastically different, and so where we would be now, if it would have even stayed open, would be radically different. Like, it's possible that if we lived in a city, we would have partnered with different spaces, like maybe we would have partnered with Open Studio or, something like that, because there's obviously more opportunities to partner with like very established and well-known and well-used spaces.
Yes.
And so that could have been interesting. And not to say that we couldn't have done that even being here. Like, that is kind of the beauty of having a bit of like a transient style art space.
Yeah, my gut says that we would have had to work a lot harder at Sparkbox if we lived in the city.
Probably.
Where I think our first and foremost goal is like Chrissy and I are artists, and we want to identify and be artists, and be arts administrators second.
Yeah.
And I feel like in Toronto, we probably would have got consumed by the latter. Maybe there's some negatives we could talk about. Like, not being in Toronto means that like our accessibility to other shows and to other institutions and those kind of networks is a little bit lessened. I think that now with like the internet, like we could probably reduce some of that distance. Mm-hmm. But there is something to be said, like when you like have a brick and mortar space that's very close to another brick and mortar space, and you can actually like work with one another in a physical way.
I think that if you are interested, if this question is rooted in like, can I live in the country, or is that like a recipe for failure? I would say no. Like, you can definitely like live wherever you want to live. It just might, you're obviously going to have to put in a different level of work. You're going to have to, be very active in making those connections with people, because it's not going to be in your backyard. If you're not, living in New York, if you want to make connections with spaces in New York and you don't live there, then it's going to take a lot more time and effort to do that, or sometimes money, because you're probably going to have to travel there and, make the connections in that physical, real way as well. I shouldn't say the internet's not real, but you know what I mean.
Do you feel like you're more drawn towards the countryside, or are you more drawn towards being in the city? I know both have advantages, both have disadvantages. If you were kind of given like, freedom, where would you end up?
Let us know.
Catch you guys next time.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.